One day, a giant reptile appears in the middle of the fountain. Two gentlemen debate whether it's a crocodile or an alligator. You see, crocodiles have salt glands, which allows them to travel oceans and thus the world, unlike the alligator who are confined to fresh water. So an alligator would passively wait in that fountain, whereas a crocodile would leave it in search of prey. So I ask you, dear audience, for we are at a moment in history where we are forced to define what our era is. Is the 21st century a crocodile or an alligator? And the big gentleman to the right states, "It doesn't matter what his name is, it grows day by day. Even if it doesn't eat us, eventually it'll sit on us. We must get rid of it now." "My good fellow, listen to reason," the small gentleman replied. "Yes, the lizard is growing, but our scientists state mass isn't motive. Before you call it a crocodile, prove that it chooses to cross boundaries when offered better options. Otherwise, you're the one that teaches it to bite." "Thus I propose a test," the small gentleman continued. "I say we open the town gates and make a pathway to see if it walks out on its own." So they left the gates open. But instead of the people leaving, they began to throw breadcrumbs at it, because they thought it was cute. It gulped it all up and grew even larger. It grew large enough to block the corridors of the town. People could no longer pass by. However, a few children figured out that if you threw the lizard breadcrumbs, it raised its tail and offered a pathway. "The lizard is now collecting rent on our footsteps," the big gentleman said. "We are no longer feeding the animal, it is charging us. I say we declare crumbs as contraband and make them pay a toll so heavy no one finds that shortcut worth it." "No, that's an inaccurate frame of the situation," the small gentleman said. "The roads are blocked because our traffic has grown. Tourists came to our town with their wallets all so they could see the lizard." "I do agree with the notion of a toll," the small gentleman continued, "but not one too heavy, just enough to fund the widening of the roads." The small gentleman took the town's money and bought a gigantic piece of bread and threw it to the lizard. It gulped it all up and grew larger and larger. It grew large enough to block an entrance of the town center. One day, there was a deadly drought, and the town experienced a food shortage. "Too many mouths came because of the lizard," the big gentleman said. "Suspend this feeding agreement and chase out these tourists." "Tourists?" "Huh," the small gentleman said. "They are our friends, our family. They're this town's lifeblood. If we chase them away, we will turn this shortage into a famine. As I always say, more people, more minds, more solutions. We can find a bypass where everybody wins." "I disagree," the big gentleman said. "Complacency is a slow form of death. I say we need to vote." And the town indeed had a vote. The small gentleman won by a significant margin. The feed agreement grew stronger, and more tourists entered the town, all feeding the lizard extra breadcrumbs. The lizard gulped it all up and grew even larger. One day, it grew large enough to lower and raise its tail on a whim. It no longer cared whether people fed it or not. It opened its tail whenever it wanted, so the people began living on the creature's clock. "We're losing our town to this lizard, and the small gentleman is letting it happen," the big gentleman said. "Knock on the doors, pick up the phones. We're fighting back." The big gentleman pulled the rope to the right, hauling the entire town rightwards. "The lizard isn't taking this town, fear is," the small gentleman said. "Keep calm, follow the rules, and make sure the town stays open." The small gentleman pulled the rope to the left, hauling the entire town leftwards. The entire town bounced left and right for years. The townsfolk went dizzy, some went mad, and all suffered, except for the lizard. The lizard kept gulping down its crumbs and grew even larger. It grew so large, it stomped its feet and happened to crush a building beneath it. Horrendous, what a horrendous tragedy, the big gentleman said, all because the small gentleman told us to do nothing. Today it's a building, tomorrow it's our families. Wake up! The threat is already here. Stop spreading fear-based propaganda. That was an accident, the small gentleman said. Look at its size. It must have thought the building had breached its territory. Once the debate got nowhere, the big gentleman held a private meeting with his friends. That lizard is an intelligent alien species that will destroy us all. It is smart, so smart that it understands perfectly how hopelessly naive the small gentleman is, like a child chasing after butterflies, that he will do nothing in the face of our own destruction. But we did take a fair vote, one of his friends said. Nah, he cheated. Look at those tourists, they inflated his numbers. I don't know about that. That's the point. Try to think from my perspective. It could be or not could be. And the ambiguity drives me mad. Nevertheless, now we must take the town center. It is the only way to save us all. In the middle of the night, the big gentleman invaded the town center and locked the doors. The small gentleman could no longer enter the building, and at dawn he declared order was restored. Crumbs were no longer allowed, the town gates were closed, but unfortunately, no one listened to his orders. They still fed the lizard crumbs, and the lizard gulped it all up and grew even larger. The lizard grew so large, its shadow now covered the sun. Soldiers began marching down the streets, capturing those who fed it crumbs, and those who didn't feed it crumbs but happened to be tourists, and those who weren't even tourists but happened to look like one, and those who didn't even look like one, but the officers just were in a foul mood. Your reign of terror ends here, the small gentleman said, raising his fists against the big gentleman. I'm saving us all. You're the terror maker. The big gentleman raised his fist against the small gentleman. They dueled, but in the end, it was the big gentleman that won the sprawl. The town was devastated, but the big gentleman was proud that the lizard no longer got its crumbs. But as he turned around, he saw the lizard, and even though he didn't feed it crumbs, it kept growing, larger and larger. The people revolted, and the big gentleman was arrested. The small gentleman recovered his power. But still, nothing had happened. The lizard kept on growing and growing. We don't understand. What do you think is going on? The town asked the small gentleman. Honestly, I have no idea, the small gentleman replied. The town was crushed, the markets were closed, and the townsfolk began to leave. After a long sigh, the small gentleman visited the big one. Old pal, I am sorry. You were right, I failed this town. I dismissed your warnings as exaggerations and delayed our measures. I should have listened to you more. I am also sorry. I thought I was the only one who could fix this, and you were standing in my way. But it turns out my methods didn't work either, and here we are. The big gentleman and the small gentleman shook their hands. Then all of a sudden, the lizard shrunk down to below its normal size. Huh? It used to look like such a big problem, until we joined hands.